foothills of Colorado. Welcome to Raiders in 30, the podcast for the thinking fan. It's good to be back. We've been doing a couple weeks in between episodes at this point. I don't want to be redundant, but we've talked about it. At the end of the day, if there's just not that much news to talk about, I'm not going to come in here and force it. I don't want to promote clickbait. I don't want to promote the same trade rumors that we know they're not happening, but what else are we going to talk about? Frankly, I don't want to get off on a total rant here. I think the entire sport would benefit if people just took some time off right in the summer. Imagine if we didn't really have any football news. You'll still get some reporting, of course, but imagine if we didn't have the same level, if there was 75 to 85% less football news, maybe starting maybe June, July. Just imagine if you had a little less, and then leading into camp, it builds a little. The couple months off, I think, would excite us all more. Instead, we're usually chatting with each other on message boards, talking about how frustrated we are that we have to keep listening to the same nonsense garbage, or reading 2021 mock drafts where, of course, Derek Carr's on his way out, and the Raiders are taking someone with pick 4 because apparently it's going to be a bust of a season. Always good times. Either way, it's good to be back with you. As we get closer to the season starting, of course, we'll be weekly, and once the season's going, without question, we'll be weekly. But for now, I just wanted to come talk to you, catch up, hit a few topics. So one thing I saw popping up, and I've told you this, one of the ways I get topics is I just like to see, is there something being discussed at length on the message boards? Is there something that seems to be popping up, or that people are arguing this that maybe this is happening when I don't think it is, or vice versa? And one of the things I've noticed is the penalties have started to pop back up as a discussion topic, where you have most of the fan base that looks at it and just says, we just get hammered in penalties. Then, of course, you have the few people who come in and say, that's ridiculous, it's in your head, you just think that's true. To me, it always seemed pretty obvious. I've watched every Raider game for the past however many years. I've told the story of my Giants fan wife, who, when we first met, you just kind of thought I was yelling about football because, of course, I am. Then started watching every Raider game because, she's married to me now. And I remember her a couple seasons back saying, you used to say that, but I got to tell you, it's now that I'm watching, I don't think you're making it up. It just seems unreasonable. So what I did is this. I said, let me go back a certain distance, and I want to look at penalties year to year, and I just want to see, is it something that's in our head, or is it something that is a legitimate, concern. So I went back to 2006. The reason that's as far back as I went is every site I looked at went back to 2006 is as far back as they went. And at that point, I said, okay, let me dig up some 2005. And then I started getting some weird way they were labeling the stats. And long story short, it was just easier to go back this far because that's what was available, most easily available. So I'm going to start backwards. From 2006 up through 2019, here is how the Raiders finished in penalties. I'm just giving their rank. This is where they finished for most penalties in a season. I didn't do yards. I just did who had the most penalties called on them. 2006, 7th. 2007, 2nd. 2008, 3rd. 2009, 2nd. 2010, 1st. 11, 1st. 12, 9th. 13, 5th. 14, 8th. 15, 3rd, 16, 1st, 17, 9th, 18, 17th, 2019, 3rd. I just rattled off 14 seasons. In those 14 seasons, the Raiders finished top 3 in penalties 8 times. Of the remaining 6, 5 of them we were in single digits, meaning we were either 1 through 9. And then in 2018, we had one random outlier where we were 17th. That was also a year we were so bad we probably didn't really need to worry about getting penalized, or the refs didn't need to worry about penalizing us, I should say. Now that stat by itself wouldn't necessarily tell you everything you need to know, because there's a lot of variables. But what are the variables? I mean, what are the big ones? Your coaches, your coordinators, your players. At the end of the day, those are the things that can change. Okay, well, if you had the same coach, the same defensive coordinator, and the same talent for a stretch of 10 years, and you led the league in penalties every year, there could be something to that. Maybe you have an undisciplined team. Maybe you have an undisciplined coach. Maybe you need to make some changes. I could understand that. But from 2006 to now, I did the research on it, of course. In that period of time, the Raiders have had 8 coaches. Okay, 8 head coaches. And with 8 head coaches, that means that at least we had 8 different sets of coordinators. And that means we had a ton of players coming and going. I mean, think of how different this roster was 2 years ago. And now imagine how different it's been over the past 14 seasons. We couldn't even, I was going to do a dig up like how many different players we had, and I couldn't even put the time into that. Think of the number of coaches, the number of players, the number of seasons, and yet we are consistently at or near the top of the league in penalties with one outlier in 14 years. Hear that, ask yourself the following question. Is it possible that's just a coincidence? 14 years being toward the top of the league or first in the league several times, second, third several times. Is it possible that just happened to be the way it is? It's not. It's not possible. That is too big of a coincidence. When you start factoring in the changing of coaches, how many different players have come in and out, and the number of seasons we're looking at, that is far, far too big a coincidence. To me, that indicates there's something else going on. Everyone I know, to some extent, believes the league is rigged in some way. Again, we're not total pro wrestling over the top here where we're, deciding who wins the Super Bowl at the beginning of the season. I believe that would be too hard to pull off in general. But you can't tell me that the league doesn't have favorites. You can't tell me that the right things don't happen to the right teams a little too often and the wrong things happen to the wrong teams a little too often. Again, over the course of a season, okay, that's a coincidence. 2, 3 seasons, maybe. When you start talking about 5, 10, 15, 20 seasons for some teams, and we could do a whole podcast on the bogus calls the Patriots have gotten for 20 years, not taking anything away from their talent and coaching, but I could fill an hour just talking about how ludicrous a lot of that is. So I think we all accept that the NFL to some level is sketchy, if nothing else. So when I look at this, the only conclusion I'm left with is they're pulling something on the Raiders. The good news is this, I believe it stops after this year. We're in Vegas. We basically went from the bottom of the league in terms of, where do people want to play as far as city and stadium goes, and where does the NFL want to make its centerpiece? Hey, look at us. Look where we are. We went from the bottom to the top in one season. That by itself is going to change. We have, I think it's 4 primetime games this year. 25% of our games are primetime. The league's not going to want, they're not going to want a shit show in those games. They're going to want to present, look at this new stadium. Look at how beautiful everything is out here. That's what they're going to want to go for. So I do think that whatever beef we had with the league, whatever old wars they were still fighting, Al Davis and Pete Rozelle fighting from the great beyond, whatever war is still going on, that's done with. And I'm looking forward to this year, and I hope I'm not wrong about that, but I do believe we're going to see a significant change in how that works this year. Moving on. Talking about this year, there's a couple things that, when I was looking over our team, when I was really diving into the rosters, when I was looking at schedule, when I was just doing all my usual fan stuff, not even in preparation for this, just the things I enjoyed doing as a fan, there's something I kept coming back to. And 2016 was a special year. We all remember that, and we all loved that year for the obvious reasons. We don't have to talk about it. We looked at this team that was, on their way we were on our way to 13-3, I believe it was, before Carr got hurt, because I think that was 12-3 when we won that game. We would have beat Denver with Carr the next week. We would have ended up with either, I think, the 2 seeds. Someone told me it was the 1. I don't remember. Carr doesn't break his leg. We're 13-3. With a first-round bye. The AFC title game is us versus the Patriots. And if you go back and you look at articles from that time, everyone was saying the same thing. Hey, the Patriots are the favorite, of course, but the only team that can go in there and beat them is the Raiders. And that would have been a hell of a game. And I don't know if we would have won, but I do know this. We wouldn't have gone there and gotten blown out. It would have been a fun, tight game. And it might have been us in that Super Bowl that year if Carr didn't get hurt. We all looked at that 2016 team at the time and just thought, man, this is what we're set up for years for this. But the problem was, a lot of that team or that season was really, it wasn't sustainable. When you look at our record in one-score games, we talked about this on an earlier podcast. I think we were 10-1, and one-score games are essentially coin flips. 10-1 is not. You might be able to go, 6-4, maybe even 6-5, maybe even like a 7-4 if you're a better team. 8-3, you're pushing it a bit. 10-1 is, I mean, every single thing that could fall our way fell our way to go 10-1 in one-score games. That wasn't going to last. As far as sustainability goes, well, we had this great offense. But if you look at it, did we really? And I'm gonna talk about that in a minute when I do a comparison. Again, we were top of the league in penalties, which we saw. Which I mean, that's a disaster. Even no matter how good you are, it's a disaster unless you're at that Legion of Boom level where hey, listen, we play aggressively. That's why we do so well back here. We take some extra penalties, so be it. But I remember a lot of promising drives being stopped that year for really badly timed penalties. The defense wasn't that good. I think we finished 24th that year. So it's not like we had this great, just young, up-and-coming juggernaut we were building. We actually just happened to have a really fortunate year. And coming off that year, it wasn't reasonable. I actually specifically remember, and this is kind of where I first got into where I first learned about the one-score game stack. Because I'm into advanced statistics to an extent. Some of them it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, this is getting to be a little too much. But in general, I like advanced statistics. And going into the 2017 season, I remember reading an article where someone predicted 7-9 for the Raiders and said, look, if you look at last year, these guys, every single break that could go their way went their way, and that's just not sustainable year to year. So when we were excited about that team, we were excited about something that was happening right at that moment. This year's team, we need to be excited about this year's team for now and the long term, because what we have right now is significantly better than 2016, and that's the point I'm getting to. For all the talk about the 2016 team, aren't we significantly better now? Let's take a look. Let's start here. Our wide receiver group in 2016, everyone fondly remembers, Carr just chucking it all over and throwing up them 50-50 balls to Crabtree and Cooper, breaking those touchdowns, and it was great. Of course it was. But here's the thing. After Cooper and Crabtree, who did we have? The wide receiver 3 was Seth Roberts. And I don't have it in front of me, but I think he had just about 400 yards. It was something like 390 something. And that was our number 3 receiver. And you recall that was the year that he caught that 50-yard overtime winner in Tampa. So really, here's a guy that other than one catch had 350 yards the entire season as our number 3 wide receiver. We didn't have much going on at wide receiver at the time. We had Crabtree, who Carr I don't think Carr's ever trusted a receiver more than Crabtree. It was a pleasure just watching him chuck up those 50-50 balls to him, and he came down with most of them. And Cooper, we know what he did. But that's all we had. We didn't have anything at wide receiver after those two. Compare that to this year. We're going in there with Ruggs, with Ty Williams, with Renfro, with Edwards, and with Bowden at the wild card. Think about the wide receiver group I just rattled off there, and then go back and look at our roster from 2016. Frankly, I'd be surprised. I know some big fans listen to this podcast. I'm a big fan. I'd be surprised if anyone here could name our 1 through 5 from 2016 off the top of their head. This year we have these. I didn't even mention our acquisition from Philly, Aguilar. And again, Aguilar is your lead guy. Aguilar is your second guy. Aguilar is the 5th guy. Yeah, okay, that could be something. So, or just as a depth guy in general. We have more talent at wide receiver than we did at 2016, but it's actually not even close. It's not even close when you compare the level of talent and the depth. So what about running backs? Well, it's Josh Jacobs versus anyone who was running the ball for us in 2016. Anyone who got the ball in 2016 isn't better than Josh Jacobs, doesn't have us more excited than Josh Jacobs. So really, at the end of the day, probably don't have to talk about the running back too much, do we? Tight end. Now, tight end, we have Darren Waller, who, Darren Waller, we all know what he can do. Most of the league knows what he can do, and a lot of the fans of the NFL in general know what he can do. But this is going to be the year that people say, "Whoa, that guy's next level." Because last year, and we've talked about this at length, last year it was actually not too hard to stop Waller. Teams would get in there in the second at halftime, and they'd say, "Look, we just got to put our best cornerback on Waller. We got to stack the box against Jacobs. The rest will probably take care of itself." And I mean that's why we had a rough second half of the season, and that's why my God, we just couldn't score in the second half, especially the third quarter, because teams came out and just knew, okay, we don't have to shut down the wide receivers. Ty was hurt at that point. Renfro missed a quarter of the season because of that damn hit in the Jets game. They knew if they shut down Waller, that was that. That's not going to be doable this year, and we've talked about that. We know all the reasons why. But getting to the point, our group in 2016 was pretty much Clive Walford and Michael Rivera. All right, those are a couple guys who I think they combined for something like, I took a look beforehand. I think they combined for something like 300 yards total or something. Excuse me, it was maybe like 500 yards. I think I'm confusing it with something else. I think it was about 500 yards or maybe about 550 that those two combined for. Think of who we have this year. We already know Waller. We don't have to talk about him. That's Waller, and then our second tight end is Witten, and then our third tight end is Moreau. Think about that tight end group compared to the 2016 tight end group, and you're probably, Waller by himself, and it wouldn't be close, but then think about a guy like Witten. Yeah, Witten's old, but he doesn't have to come out here and be a stud. He just has to do those things he can do. And then Moreau was a rookie last year, and the second or third string tight end caught, 5-6 touchdowns. That's a damn good tight end group, and it's much better than we had. Quarterback, same guy we had then, except he's in year 3 of a system, and he's got more talent around him. Offensive line, probably a wash. We had a great O-line then. We have a great O-line now. Hopping on to the defense. Defensive line and the linebackers. I'm going to dive into this a little more later, but our D-line is better and deeper than it was in 2016. And our linebackers, it's not even a contest. Now, right off the bat, I know what everyone's thinking. Well, yeah, we had Khalil Mack in 2016. Obviously, Khalil Mack, prime Khalil Mack, 2016 Khalil Mack, is better than any individual defensive player we have right now. No question there. No one's arguing that. But the question is, would you rather have Khalil Mack and a team of, a lot of scrubs around him, because let's call it what it was, or would you rather have a solid 11 defensive starters where there's we can get better in areas, but there's no holes on this team. This team is just talented and this team is hungry. I'd go for that every time. Khalil Mack is better than anyone who's on the defense now, but the rest of the starting defenses now is probably better than the rest of the starting defense we had then. Secondary. It's a young secondary we have now. Okay, but who are you more excited about? I'm going to give you, the rundown here. Which secondary gets you more excited, gets you more amped? Mullins, Arnett, Abram, Muse, Joyner, hopefully at safety, Robertson, or TJ Carey, DJ Hayden, Cujo, Reggie Nelson, Keith McGill. Which one of those secondaries are you putting on the field, even with some guys who are unproven because they're young? And by the way, look at that secondary. Arnett, rookie. Mullins, second year. Abrams, second year. Muse, rookie. Robertson, rookie. Think of those 5 names and realize if these guys are good, and, we know a couple of them are, and we have high hopes for the others. If these guys are good, this is a good time to stop and realize those guys are all 21, 22, 23. This could be a secondary we're looking at for 10 years, keeping them together for that period of time. Again, I've said this before about Mayock's draft last year and this year. If his draft this year is half as good as it was last year, and we get a legitimate 4 starters out of it, that's the kind of stuff you build dynasties on. Back-to-back drafts where, 8, 10, 12, 14 of the starters you have on the field came from 2 drafts in a row. That's how you build a dynasty. So now, going further. Oh, and by the way, we got to do one last comparison here. 2016 versus now, place kicker. Damn it, I miss Seabass. That's all I have to say about that. Look over the rosters from those 2 years. As an experiment, you've heard me talk about it. Go dig them up. Go look at our starting roster from 2016, compare it to our projected starting roster for this year. Tell me in the comments how that 2016 team was better. You can't find any position we're not deeper at. You can't find any position we're not more talented at. Again, you can't find any position we don't have more top talent at, except for, obviously, Khalil Mack. I'd rather have that team, though. I'd rather have that team of all-around talent, guys who play as a unit, guys who play hard, guys who are hungry. I'd rather have that than a superstar like Mack, but then everyone around him, you're like, yeah, but if Mack doesn't make the play, nothing good's going to happen. So then you put that kind of pressure on that guy. I'll tell you what the real shame is. It's a shame we didn't have prime Khalil Mack on this team right now. But what can you do? You can't have it all, and we wouldn't have this team if we had him. Getting to the last point, this might be a bit of a shorter episode, but getting to the last point here. We talked about comparing 2016 to this year's team that we'll have coming, and it got me thinking because I started looking at our front seven. And one thing it got me thinking was, man, the Raiders haven't had this good of a front seven in a long time. And then so I started looking back and thinking, okay, well, what's a long time? I got to tell you, by my look, and I'm an optimistic guy, you know that if you listen to me, but I have high hopes for this front seven for several reasons. If you look at the Raiders roster history, I haven't found a front seven that was this good since the 80s, and I specifically went to the 83 Super Bowl team. Here was that front seven. We were running 3-4 at the time. Howie Long, Reggie Kinlaw, Lyle Alzado at the front three. By the way, if you're a younger fan and you maybe don't know as much about Raider history, go check out, you can check out, they have, they have Football Life or films. I forget what it's called, but if you basically look up the Super Bowl years, 76, 80, 83, you can find a little documentary on YouTube. If you check out this 83 team, if you don't know about guys like Lyle Alzado, John Matuzak, Ted Hendricks, my God, you're missing out. You got to go check these guys out. Matt Millen, you might know him and think, oh, isn't that guy who was a terrible GM in Detroit? Yes. Go watch this guy as a player. He was an animal. So if you haven't done research on these teams, you're doing yourself a disservice. Go out and get it done. But that said, that's a damn good front seven. Ted Hendricks at this point, he was old. I think this was his last year. But one of the best linebackers who ever played. I think the greatest outside linebacker who ever played the position, my opinion. But these guys weren't force, and they made a good secondary great because of what they could do up front. Now, I'm going to read off our front seven, and let me go ahead and make this clear. I'm certainly not comparing the two in terms of overall statistics, is what I'll say. Because, look, Howie Long's a Hall of Famer. Ted Hendricks is a Hall of Famer. I can't sit here and say, well, we've got, Max Crosby in his second year. He's Howie Long. No, we don't know that yet. So I'm not saying that these guys are definitely just as good because we don't know. I just read off, a list of several Hall of Famers and just legitimate, badasses on the field. Alzado, former Defensive Player of the Year. That said, listen to this front seven. Crosby. I don't have to get you hyped about Crosby, right? Mo Hurst, one of the better D tackles in the league, especially from a pass pressure standpoint. Malik Collins, one of the better pass rushing interior defensive linemen. Farrell, we've talked about him at length on this podcast. I think I've had 2 segments on 2 shows dedicated specifically to why people are giving him a hard time he doesn't deserve. You know what? And I think we've heard he's already added about 20 pounds of muscle in the offseason. Expect big things from Farrell this year, and if he has a disappointing season, we'll come back and talk. But think about the defensive fronts you've seen, the front 4 you've seen over the past decade or two, and think about, have you ever had more confidence in a front 4 since 2000 than in the front 4 I just named? If so, let me know, because I can't remember which group you're talking about. Linebackers. We can't stress it enough as Raider fans. We have been dealing with coaches or organizations or coordinators for some reason that just don't think there is value in the linebacker position, and that's been reflected in the lack of talent we've had there. Somebody came along and finally figured out, you know what? We need some talented linebackers. It's just, you can't get away with it anymore. Maybe for a while you could. I don't know. Probably not. But they seem to think it. We go out, we get the best coverage linebacker in Littleton. We get, I think we get PFF's 11th ranked linebacker in Quee. And then we have Morrow on the other side. Morrow as the lead dog linebacker who's got to make it happen. Hate it. Morrow as the third best linebacker who doesn't have to have all the pressure on him. I'm fine with that. I'm a fan of that. So think of that front 7. Think of the front 7s we've had, again, over the past 20 years. You can't find a front 7 that compares to this, and we have depth at the position. We have depth on the ends. We have depth at the D-line position. We have depth at linebacker. We have a couple of good slot corners. We can slide behind one of those guys if we need a little extra coverage over the middle. We have not had a front 7 as good as this in a long time. And what does a front 7 do? It makes your secondary that much better. There's basically 2 schools of thought there. You build a shutdown secondary at the expense of your front 7 with the hopes, well, if you can get them an extra second or 2, maybe they can make a little more happen. I'm a fan of the other way. Just bulk up that front seven, and that's going to make your secondary a lot better. This is the kind of front seven that can do that. Think of what Crosby did last year without a lot around him, and now put Collins on that line too. Now get Farrell back on the field healthier, bulked up. We all know what happened last year when he for a month he was sick, and we know he lost 20 pounds. We heard all the stories. Put linebackers like Quee Littleton behind him, and imagine what that guy's going to do. I mean, look what he did as a rookie. It's unbelievable. The Crosby story, just can't be told enough. That this guy was a fourth rounder who, if you did a redraft, if I remember, I read some, redrafting the 2019 NFL draft, and those are fun to read because hindsight's a fun time. And I think they had the Giants taking him at whatever pick it was they had. The Giants, they had 2 picks in the first round, and I think that was the one where they took Chase Daniel. They took Daniel Jones. I call him Chase Daniel all the time because I'm always confusing him with the other quarterback, Chase Daniel played for the Bears and Lions. So I said it all the time by accident, and then it was annoying my wife, so I just kept doing it, and now I keep doing it by mistake. Daniel Jones, I think in the redraft, they had the Giants still taking Daniel Jones, but with their later pick in the first round, whatever it was, 20 or something, and they had him taking Crosby with that 7th or 9th pick, whichever it was they took Jones with. Here's a guy we took in the 4th round that on redraft, they're saying, the Giants probably should have taken this guy top 10. That's the kind of talent we got, and that's what Mayock can do. And that's all Mayock. That wasn't luck. He knew, maybe he didn't know Crosby would be this good, but he knew we had talent there. This front seven is going to be game-changing. And all that shit that you're used to seeing the past so many years, where, you know what? It's, okay, it's first down, they snap, dump over the middle, and you're like, what? We're just giving up 7 to 10 yards on every play on the exact same play. It's like playing Madden on the easiest mode. I'll just run a slant every play. Slant, touchdown. And we've had to watch that for so long, just infuriated. Can somebody just cover one guy, one play? For one play, can somebody just cover one guy running a slant over the middle, and we just couldn't do it? That's not happening this year, guys. It's not happening. Remember all those times it's 3rd and 13, and where most teams, when they're on defense 3rd and 13, they're like, oh, okay, the offense is coming back on. Most fan bases are calm. You and I are sitting there biting our nails like, we cannot give up first down on another 3rd and 10, 3rd and 13, 3rd and 17. Just don't do it. Guys, that's not happening this year, okay? Those problems that we've been dealing with, where our defense just has to come up with a big play and just can't do it, that's not happening this year. Those days are over. Get used to the new way because it's going to be fun. And I, for one, can't wait, and I can't wait for this season, and we're going to have a season. I'm going to tell you that every time I'm down here. I'm going to be the positive guy. Don't sweat it. We'll have a season. We'll see who's in the stands. We'll see how many people are. But I'm confident, and I think we're going to get there. Everyone, it's been great. Stay safe. Have fun. Hope you're all doing well. I'll be back. I might have something next week. I might not. But I'll tell you this. Once August hits, once we get to those camps, we're going to be there. I'll be here every week, obviously. And at that point, we're going to have some real fun. Thank you for listening. This is Raiders in 30, podcast for the thinking fans. Stay safe. We'll talk next week, the week after. We'll see.